He's the vice president there. And he's also an FRM, financial risk manager, with 15 years of splendid career in auditing and risk management within banking domain. And also he have helped in setting up end-to-end transaction testing team in India at a large investment bank, and successfully led and executed several global projects, including market risk, liquidity risk management, treasury, bank operations, and regulatory reporting. So this was about from the book. Actually, I just wanted to come here because Dev has been the one who have kind of designed the entire conference as such, because he's one of the ones who have just guided us in this conference, and also that's why I wanted that I introduce specially to him. And let me tell you, he was not coming actually. Unfortunately, he was being held up with a lot of the audit work due to his deadlines. He worked till night 5 o'clock, just that he comes here and delivers the session. Right, so Saturday we had to cancel his flight and book it back again on Sunday. So it has been that kind of commitment from the speakers here, and I hope that you guys will enjoy his session for sure. Thank you so much, Dev.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So if I actually said something that was inappropriate, it's just the lack of sleep. It's not in my content. So, okay, I think thanks to Sripal for, organizing such a wonderful event, right? And all of us here have gathered to take away, something for us in our day-to-day lives. So what I'll try and do is, if you can show up the topic here, that would be great. So as you can see from, what we put up here, right? It's audit and assurance in the new world of data. So that's the key word there, data. And role of analytics, in audit. Now these two go hand in hand, so the and probably was not required, but still, trying to keep these as two separate topics as we start, and then join together as we end the session. So my idea for this session is really, to familiarize you with what are we doing in this space today, where the industry is moving, what are the pitfalls, what are some of the things we can improve on, and what impact it can bring about as far as the audit assurance industry is concerned from that standpoint. Now, maybe say 5 years, 7 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, if you did a word cloud of the most important, items being discussed, what would be the most prominent one? Anyone? So I'll say that again, right? If you did a word cloud of the most important things that were discussed, maybe 5 years ago, what do you think would appear as the most prominent in that word cloud? Blockchain more recently, good try. Sorry? Big data more recently, so maybe rewind 5 years. More recently, yes, absolutely, and we'll get to that. So you've got to my conclusion before the start, so thank you for that. But then 5 years ago, what did we have? Macros. Oh, no. Okay, so let me just rewind back. It was oil, right? The most discussed item was oil. We had a huge amount of discussion in terms of where oil would head. All the investment banks were writing research on oil. People predicted it to be like $150 a barrel, down to 30, shale. All sorts of things were all around oil. So when you did the word cloud of all the searches, everything, oil would be the most, would say, valuable word. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but then most discussed for sure. What happens today? What is that replaced with? Data. That's what he said, right? And data is, so you can imagine the transformation that has happened, from what we are seeing as being very powerful. So you have a commodity, visible, tangible, that you can touch, feel, sell, buy, know the inventory, that makes it something that you can say, yes, very valuable. What do you do with data? How do you make that valuable, right? So you kind of draw the analogy from there and just say that, okay, if data can be the most discussed thing in this world, then what we as auditors have to consider and take a leaf out of that and say, what is that we can do? What sort of access do we have to that kind of data, right? How many of you have dealt with very large sets of data in your audit? Just show of hands. Right? What is it? 2 gigabytes, 10 gigabytes, 1 megabyte? How much is that? Large is a large is like a spectrum, right? So of numbers, maybe 10 gigabytes, 15 gigabytes, right? Somewhere there, you call that large. But today data has capacity to take much more than that. We're talking about terabytes of data and analysis on that particular data, right? So this is really the new world that we're talking about. Now, audit as an industry is somewhat behind, if you consider, if I can say that, right, in this closed, sort of room. Why are we behind? Because, if you think about traditionally, what have we done as a part of our audits? What do? You actually walk in, do some planning activity, right? What do you need for planning activity? Data, right? Then you move forward from planning and you say, well, I've chalked out what I need to cover, A, B, C, D. Then you go back to your stakeholder and say, what do I need? Data, right? You finish up scrubbing the data, you analyze the data, you do all sorts of things with that data. Where do you end up? A lot of mess. And then you've got to pick up something from that mess and then say, this is what is important to you from your data. So what have you done? Ultimately, you massage the data in a way that you're able to go back and present to someone who gave it to you, right? He gave you a lot of things. And he said, I'll take out something from this and I'll give it back to you. Effectively, what have you done? You may say, I've been a very smart auditor, right? That's what you would have said to yourself, right? Feeling very proud. But that's not the case at all, right? It's his data. I've taken that back, massaged it, given it back to him. Seems more like an art than anything else, right? So forget your education. You don't need these fancy degrees behind you. Just learn how to massage data. Because that's it. And you stop there, right? That'll take you quite far. And this is what we've been doing. But not having realized that we probably, touch maybe 2% of what we could have done, 5%. I don't have a percentage that I can confidently say what we've touched, but it feels like you can go on with this, right? You can go on with this, right? And the beauty about this is that the more access you have to information, right, the more wonderful things you can do. You can draw analogy out of that. But what we do is we waste data, right, that we have with us. People give you spreadsheet, heaps of data. Your traditional auditor mindset, what would it do? It'll say, you know what? I've read the auditing manual, Deloitte, PwC, I put a comparison chart. Everybody says 25 samples. Gospel truth. Cannot move away from that. So, no matter, give me what you want. I know how to pick the 25. Right? So, you take a large investment bank that would have spent 500 million, a basic example, right? It would have spent 500 million to 600 million on a travel budget, right? So travel expense, including various things, components within that, right? Would touch roughly around 500 million. Now what would you do? 25 samples. Brilliant. And the average ticket size of a travel? Would it be $1 million? Can't be. So average ticket size maybe 5K. You do a very good luxurious first class flight, business class. Maybe he can tell you the latest fare. He's flown down from the States, right? Emirates A380, that's the max you can get to, right? So maybe 5K an average ticket size. So you divide the 5K by the 500 million. Imagine the number of transactions, right? You can do a quick math, right? Isn't that humongous amount of data that you have with you? And what have you done with that? 25. You said it. You said it. So you guys are really with me in sync now. So good. Your audit ABC 101 is really strong. That's what I can assess in this class. So Shripal, your class is going really well here. Where is he? So that's where we are right today. But that's kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, if you're going to sit down, and if you think about a listed company, right, you're almost giving assurance to your shareholders, your board, whatever, right? Your stakeholders, primary stakeholders, and assurance on the control environment out of 25 samples. So you picked some laundry bills and told your shareholders that this company looks fine, right? That's not the way it works, right? So this is where we need some transformation, right? That was just on a lighter note, right? Of course, we do some stratification and we all try to make some meaning out of the data, but honestly, what I was trying to bring about is that we've got to transform this a little bit more. If you've been part of the industry, right? Like I've been part of the first line, second line, and now of course the third line, where you're beginning to see that, third line is actually behind. If you look at, I was just discussing at the backstage there is, what are we doing with this profession, right? So when you think about the smartphone industry, right? It started with button phones, somebody innovated, moved to the smartphones, now they're moving to AI, whatever, right? They can capture, they can tell you, they give you a suggestion, so many things happening around, right? But where's the audit profession? Still with the 25 samples, right? We're still there. So what is our innovation? Have we gone back and questioned and said, you know what, let's take a step back and say, we've got to transform this industry. So what are the steps we're going to take to transform this industry? If you follow the herd, you're done. Right? 20 years later, 25 samples. Nothing changes. Seriously, nothing changes. And that is where we are today, right? We haven't really made use of tools and techniques in that fashion that can enable us to do better, right? And consider, ourselves as valued on a round table that is sitting with senior executive management, right? You would want people to pick up the phone and say, hey, look, I have this problem. Can you advise me how I should go about it, right? You can't turn around and say, we looked at 25 samples 6 months ago, you were okay. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. So that's not the way it works, right? So data in your hand can do wonderful things, right? So I guess so far so good, right? You kind of follow where we're going with this. So now then, we've got defined the problem statement. We've taken more than what we could have said in one word, that we don't do enough, right? And moved on to next, what should we do? But the context just helps you reflect and say, yeah, we haven't really done much, right? And that essentially is where we, okay. Feels like someone's staring at you. Right? So it's almost like, telling yourself, what do we do next, right? What do we do with this? So, I mean, the way at least, again, my personal opinion, right? The way we think about it is, is we really got to, take on board technology. Of course, most of you would have that view, and that's beginning to happen, right? But how many of us are really putting that mind, or again saying, that's technology's, headache. If they develop that tool and give it to me, then that enables me to move faster. Kind of seems disjointed, right? We've got to bring this together and then say, you know what? You are enablers, but we are the idea, right? We need the change more than you need the change. So don't develop anything that unless we give you the idea to develop what we need. So you see where it joins together. Of course, what they expected to come up with is say, okay, this is the technology I can use. So what's your problem statement? Okay, I have 20,000 legal documents to review. Right? Massive investment banks indicating a lot of loans, reams of documents, ISDA agreements, drafted US laws, rule by rule, line by line. It's got everything under the sun. They reprint the book in the agreement, the law book, right? So what do you do with that? How do you analyze a clause that could bring the bank down, could bring any institution down? How do you identify that, right? You're not going to do it with 25 samples. Seriously not, right? So how do you kind of think of these scenarios and play in and say, okay, what can technology do for me? And we'll get to that in a bit. So these are kind of things that we've got to consider and think and say that, yeah, now's the time that we participate even more actively to transform this industry, right? And that, most importantly, brings value to your stakeholder. Because you're not seen as someone who is a contributor, but you're almost seen as someone who needs to be there because the statute says so, and you are going to produce something for us that we will read, we may read, that kind of a scenario. It's not like, I haven't seen it, it's really important, we get these guys in, right? And we can make that transformation quite easily using, technology. When I say easily, it's really about, how quickly we can get on board so life becomes easy. Now, if we kind of move forward, right, what can we do? Where does this all start, right? And if you kind of think about what we have access to, like I was saying earlier, right, huge amount of data. Now, how many of you are aware that data analytics can be used in audit? Show of hands, everybody, right? What percentage have you really used and explored? Have you used this like a substitute for Excel? Most parts, right? Because you want to tell your management team that, yeah, we've adopted data analytics. So you stopped using Excel. So that's great adoption, right? Because you got rid of one tool. The license is not too expensive. This is more expensive. So still use the Excel, right? And you save some cost, right? Don't try and adopt a tool to replace Excel. Adopt a tool that scales from Excel. And that potentially is one of the pitfalls there that we have at this point of time. Okay? Now let's go back to that example of, say 100 million transactions, 10 million transactions. What would you do in Excel at best? Yeah? First thing you do is slow your computer. So you become unproductive. That's what happens first, right? Because what you're going to do with that is, that's not your job, right? What we've got to do is, our job is to take risk out of that. So what you got to draft as you think about audits, right? Don't think the sample way. Think about, what does this data set mean to the organization? That's how you start, right? And then you say, okay, these are 4 broad categories of risk. Okay, I'm in a jurisdiction where the perception of corruption index is super high. That's probably one of the highest compared to, say, the Western countries, right? So what do you do in that scenario? You kind of then say, I'm not going to pick those 25 at random. That's the word we love to write in our documentation, right? Random, right? I woke up this side, so this random. I woke up that side, so that random. It doesn't work like that. So what's really the risk out of that data? What's really risk out of that data? It's about us being exposed to potential sanctions, maybe an FCPA sanction, right? Bribery. UK anti-bribery laws may attract us. So you've got to look at that data with that kind of severity. It's a very simple test. If you pick up a voucher and go through the details and say, yeah, this guy approved, that guy approved, and you're done. Do you think these days any document would go out of a company without an approval? Is it possible? Right? Very unlikely, right? We've organized ourselves today in the world in such a way, most parts, right? I mean, there could still be small, medium enterprises where you're not worried really about that kind of business, right? If you're really worried, yeah, probably there needs some automation there as well. But then point here really is there's so much automation, so much attention, the people involved, risk and control, first line, second line, all of these things are now quite set in, right? But still, where are we? Chasing an approval. Right? Your test step will read, invoice not approved, so what? You go back with the finding to management and said, we selected 100 invoices and 7 of your invoices weren't approved. So what? Dead, buried, gone. That's gone. Money's gone out of the door. What are you going to do anyways, right? So, of course, you'll turn around and tell me, you know what? Preventive controls and we are assessing the design and no. That's not what management is looking for. Management is looking for an analysis to tell them what's the control environment as far as payments are concerned. Right? If you can really construct that headline statement, then you have a meaningful place on the table. Otherwise, your 7 samples, I would turn around and tell you, man, I run a business of 20 billion a year, my turnover, 7 invoices unapproved, I'm fine. I can live with that. There's some inherent risk I carry in the business, and I'm fine with that. If you come back and tell me, yeah, you're carrying inherent risk, thank you. Right? I don't need you. Right? I don't need you. If you come back and tell me, just I focused on your inherent risk of payments are risky. Everybody knows payments are risky. But how risky? How have you gone about assessing and making that? So, like we said, okay, did I go back and understand, does this have a regulatory impact? Call your analytics guy and say, can you crawl the web? That's a term. Can you crawl the web and see where we could be in trouble? Right? Can we find a way to, get maybe a list of, critical items in the regulations that we can match off against? How can you do that? Take some things out of the payment system, find a way to automate it and match. You can do that. Because I'm talking about a live tool that we are working on. That makes life so simple. So you're only looking at exceptions. Right? So the way you get to analytics really is to enable technology to help you create exception-based workflows for you to work off as auditors. So, that's the starting point, because only then you are able to assess, how much more deeper you want to get into the activity. Otherwise, your starting point is flawed in the first place. You would say, okay, payments are risky, given, but you didn't do any further analysis to go down and then tell people that, this is where the analysis is, this is how it's trending, right? So like I was at the airport coming in, right? So I was seeing like a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. That's what I assumed, given the nature of the conversation. We're talking, to each other, but then after a point they were texting each other. So that was flashing in my mind, right? What if we went to WhatsApp, got that data and say all mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conversations, can we get a download and do some trend analysis? There'd be no trend, because every day they have something new to pick up on, right? There is no trend, right? So that's where you get to, right, is to say we are so blessed that at least the data sets we work with has some trend, right? Has some trend, has some analysis, has some meaning that you can bring out of that data. But what do? We leave it there. You say, you live here, I got my items to worry about, I'll take them, go back to management, they care the least, they moved on to the next decision, but yeah, they'll file this on and say yes. They go back to the statutory auditors and tell them, look, we have a good internal audit function. They give you a couple of pats on the back, you're very happy, smiling, put your jacket back on, and then you'll be like, yeah, I did a good job, right? But have you really transformed the way we are working? Not at all, right? You just not budged. And if you go back and talk to, people who've been here for a while, what you do today is exactly what they did 5 to 7, 10, 15 years back, right? When I started, I did the same thing as what I'm doing today. And of course, I'm changing, attempting to change, right? But that's really what I would say. Okay, now if you just move forward, right? What's really the problem in this transformation, right? Where do we make mistakes in terms of adopting what you call as analytics? And I'm purely going to speak out of experience, having done this for a while, right? And you may have a different view, opinion, good to kind of exchange ideas, and please do bring in anything that you think you want me to sort of discuss in between what I'm saying, right? It's absolutely fine. But what happens essentially is, first is the mindset problem. The biggest problem is the mindset problem. It's not so much the company not willing to make the investment. Most companies are willing to make the investment because they know they want to get more efficient, right? It's an investment that gives you long-term results, right? So short-term pain, long-term gain. That's sort of a scenario, right? But what happens is that our inability to kind of really understand what we want is a problem, because the mindset is a problem. Okay, if you go back to the analytics guy, they're going to take another 15 days and they'll come back to us, our audit is delayed. Right? Isn't that a big problem? Right? So analytics is compounding the problem we've always had, that we've never delivered our reports on time. Right? It's compounding that problem. Today's scenario feels somewhat like that. Right? We had enough members in the team. You got one more guy who doesn't understand audit or business. He only knows technology. So you added a problem. He seems more a liability than what he can solve for me. Right? But we really haven't adopted him. We really haven't. Because what we didn't turn around and see is, what is his capability? We've tried to put our own little agenda and retrofit that with this guy and say, can you deliver this now? And he's all at sea. So he'll give you a product that is totally biased, influenced by your ideas and thoughts, right? So it's kind of, this is where we've got to kind of understand, what are we really doing with this? That's really the first problem, where your audit senior manager, whatever, is going to come back and say, whatever you do, I don't care, but deliver this on time. So how do you turn around this situation and say, I will deliver before time, right? If I make this adoption really smooth, right, into analytics. So one example I'll give you, and you probably reflect on this if you really have done this sort of sample testing, audit testing, right? Because I'm trying to be very basic, because it kind of brings to life the concept of what we are trying to use, right? So now let's think about an approval control, right? What are you going to do with an approval control? You're going to say, okay, who approved? Right? That's your first. Is he authorized to approve? Right? And in his absence, who else is authorized to approve? Right? How much can he approve? What are the things he can approve? So you're like masters at that. Right? You'll go like tear them apart. You're going to say like, so much I can do with the approval. But now with analytics, what we tend to do is, we move away from the control and we start doing more outcome based. I want to look for duplicate controls. Right? What was your objective to start with? Yeah, so you say, I look for items that are duplicates, right? I said control, I think I used the wrong word, but what are duplicates, right, in this data set? That's what you do. So what have you done? You still have to do your control testing. Now you've added on one more to do analysis of the duplicates, right? Good, still works. But what if we can transform our mindset and say, can I now start thinking if I don't have to do the control test and analytics let me do control testing? So, move away from what we've always traditionally done as outcome in our analytics to say, I will add on to the control to analyze the data. We're very fond of trends. The moment you say analytics, you'll plot a tool and say, yeah, the graph is moving straight, left, right. That's all you tend to do. But really, have we thought about, can we get a little bit more efficient in testing the control? So that's a question back to you almost, right? Go try it, go think about it. How can we transform, that sort of thinking and mindset as we go forward, as opposed to just saying that we'll add on an additional piece of work in analyzing that data. Maybe the design's already failed. The outcome is obvious that you're going to have 10 items that are going to be there, so don't waste time. Right? Can we instead find a way to say that if I can automate or analyze something in a way that picks up the design gaps? That would be more appropriate. Or can do some control testing quickly. I can scan through systems and say, pull out all the unapproved stuff. I don't have to do the testing at all. Right? So these are kind of things that, you've got to think about. So the second thing is that's where I was getting to. The second thing was, how do you adopt analytics is very important. Do you want to treat this as an add-on, or do you want to treat this as bring with, right? That is going to make a lot of difference. Now, that sounds conceptually easy in words, but this is where you need a strategy and a plan in terms of making sure that the adoption of analytics is not by force, or because my competitor is doing, I need to adopt this in the next 6 months, otherwise I'm going to be asked at that audit committee meeting and say, you're behind, because everyone else has adopted this technique already. So what are you going to do? Where's your strategy? And that ability to explain how I'm going to adopt, analytics is the key. Right? Before you kind of start using it, you continue to use what you're using. The Excel is good enough to do a lot of work that we do anyways, right? But how do you get to that core analysis of what you really want to do with it? The third thing that I would say is that what are some of the things that we can preempt from information that is already available, right? So suppose you looked at an area, you have a risk-based, or I think most of them are moving to risk-based audit systems, right? So the key thing there is, it's nice, we made the transformation, we're very happy. We used to do once in 3 years, high risk, once in 2 years, whatever, right? That sort of, assessment that we always did. We were very happy. Now we move to risk-based assessment. Now if you've truly moved to a risk-based assessment, how is that you can use analytics to actually make that truly risk-based assessment, right? So what are the parameters you're assessing on, right? What are the things, KRIs, KPIs that you think you have on board to make a quick assessment and say, what, this is an area I don't need to look at. Like you have to absolutely make those calls, right? And say, I don't need to. But you can't do that because, very conservative as auditors. That you still want to check few invoices, hope it's okay. If I do 25, I'm fine, because at least it gives me a sense of, comfort that things will be okay. May not give you anything whatsoever, right? But your ability to pick an area is really important. That's where the efficiencies come in, right? And this is the part we miss out. We adopt at the bottom first. And we say, this is your audit, go off, take this data set, do something with it, come back with a trend line, and if it shows increasing, we'll go back and question the auditee and say, why is this increasing? Or if it's decreasing, why is it decreasing? Depending on nature of whatever you're assessing or testing, right? Analytics, done, tick the box. But have you gone back and said, what did this data told me the same thing 6 months back, but I didn't bother to analyze because my audit was due only in October. Right? My audit was due only in October. Why would I spend time analyzing this data? But I could have very well gone back to the audit committee and said, I kicked this out. Why? Because I had enough information to believe that it's stable. So what you could do is a very simple thing, right? Set up 5 parameters. It's just an example, right? It's not one size fits all. So take a 5 parameters. Say, let's say scale of the business. Yeah? Let's say complexity. Let's say technology advancement, manual, automated, external industry events. Any internal operational risk events. Right? You can pick up some of these parameters and then say, I'm going to standardize KRIs and KPIs within each of these. Right? I'm going to structure these and I'm going to define these KRIs and KPIs. The moment I define this, I'm going to pull in that relevant data set to actually play on these. Right? And then maybe I can do a very simple assessment and say, my highest risk would be 5, lowest would be 1. So it's a factor of 5 into 5. So anybody scores 25 as a score is the highest possible theoretical risk. Right? And then you sort of scale down and say, they're complex but well controlled. So you kind of bring the scale down and say there should be a 3 instead of a 5. They've had huge people attrition, but you know why? Only because they completely automated the system. Good, bring the score down. Or if the reverse happened, they're manual and a lot of people left, push the score up. So now if you kind of build in this kind of analysis well in advance, in Jan, it's likely that a couple of October items get knocked off. Your Christmas break can be more enjoyable. Right? Have you heard of the Christmas miracle? You haven't heard, right? So when do audit for the year end gets delivered the most and quickly, suddenly? 24th of December. Because you lose your leave. So put things away, get the job done. 24th, you have 15 reports issued, which you could never do on the 13th of December. But 24th, you were able to achieve it. Right? Because you piled on so much with yourself. You haven't really bothered to take a step back and say how I can use analytics. Now, you may well turn around and say, I can still do it even otherwise. That's fine. That's great. You've saved some license cost for you with your ability. That's okay. But as you start scaling in terms of the data, that's not always possible. And once you start having multiple sources of data, do you think that will be possible? You can't control so much manually. You've got to put in the engine that will do the control and you manage by exception. And if that is the happy medium you can hit, then you're going to be very successful, at least to start with. Right? That's where I think we've got to start thinking about not the transformation, but how to transform. Right? And this has to be more strategic. What we tend to do is very tactical. We'd say, this area feels like it's got a lot of data. So let's use this audit for data analytics. That's the way we tag. Right? That's not the way to do it. You've got to go back and say, what is the area I would pick to audit in the first place using analytics? So at the start, when I do my continuous monitoring, you've heard of that term, right, somewhere, right? But not in the true sense, right? Is like, you go set up a meeting, 15 minutes is about the weather. There's some analytics. There is some analytics, because you've assessed multiple geographies, right? And then the next 5 minutes is a little bit of subject and business. And then the last 15 minutes is, the timing of this audit is not great, so I don't expect you guys to come, right? And can you go back to your senior management and tell them this is not possible to do at this point. We have limited availability and resources. That's where you end up. So you've got to plug in, So what's going to be helpful for us is going to be a plug-in, right? That will inform us, right? That informs us. And this is where we've had a problem. If you think of companies like Google and, the Googles of the world, the Microsoft, all the data companies, basically Amazon, what have they done so successfully? Right? They have managed to really create platforms that are scalable, but behind that is a huge artificial intelligence, sort of engine running. Of course, it's all very complex, but But the concept is simple, right? I have taken the large data set and I've tried to analyze. Right? If you shop for something, people will tell you what did you shop for and gives you prompts. Right? Why can't we kind of use that analogy? I mean, that's really advanced for us. We are still in Stone Age as far as audit is concerned, right? So that's very advanced for us. So how do you take that analogy and say, what can prompt us? What are the triggers? What are the prompts that we can get to enable us to attack the risk much earlier than after the fact? Right? Maybe there are some, you can't do all. I would totally agree with you. In all places, all the time is very difficult because you're then almost running the second line business. Right? That's not what you want to do. Right? You've got to focus on key regulatory areas where you've been slapped by the regulators on your knuckles to say you really, your control environment really is terrible. Those are the areas where you've got to now pick up. And you'll be really shocked and surprised. Some of the large, some of the really large sort of scandals that have happened. How many have heard of Societe Generale and their, the scandal that happened? Anybody? A few years back? What was the volume that Societe Generale was hit by on its P&L? Close to 7.2 billion euros. Massive. And if you just do the case study, and just read across, control, 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 control. That's it. That's it. So if controls can give you 7.2 billion, you're actually a revenue department. You can run your audit shop like a business. If your control was good enough, you would have saved the 7.2 billion hit, which is humongous. And this was perpetrated by how many people? 100? 200? Take a guess. In all your school, you've read numbers up to 1 million, right? So take a guess, how many people were involved? Just throw a number. 5 people? Anybody? More? Sound 7 billion, 5 people? The ratio seems... like, I'm thinking you're already in analytics, that's why. One. Because he was able to take advantage of the control environment. And I'll make the situation even worse in 2 minutes. Just bear with me. Right? So, one guy who perpetrated this whole thing. Sripal spoke about orchestrating this. He perpetrated this entire thing. How? Very simple control lapses. Access controls. So what happens is, if you're not familiar with investment banking, is when you're working in operations, settling trades, and doing all the settlement activity and payment activity, you should not have access to the front office, because otherwise you can potentially take a trade and go all the way through. Right? And then control the reporting so that management doesn't see the risk. So your VAR numbers don't move, your RWAs don't move, nothing moves. So basically you can control it in that fashion. It's very possible that you put in some fictitious trades and then cancel and correct, cancel, correct, cancel, correct multiple times. But there were some basic errors like this. So this gentleman, I can call him gentleman, he had access right from the operations because he worked previously in the operations, moves into the trading area, carries that access along. What should you typically do as auditors? Continuously monitor that. How accesses are monitored in the bank. Do we have a way to dismiss all the accesses when people move across Chinese walls? Do we? That's the question you should have in your mind. If you had taken your traditional approach of selecting 25, yeah, you said it, and gone about and checked accesses, what would have happened? You would have said, Jeremy, you did really well. But you didn't pick this guy himself. Jeremy would have given you a list of individuals and he would have probably thrown in a couple of accesses and you would have said, yeah, these are the 2 dodgy guys who always have, and then you believe, yeah, I got my issue. Access is not well controlled, done. 2 samples found. And he's happily going through this journey of putting in fictitious trades. Why? Because it helps him create a good P&L, right? And then the bonuses run off the P&L. That's what he tried. And you know how this continued to work? Because there's a US regulation which tells you that you are supposed to go off on mandatory vacation. right? Mandatory vacation. That means you can't approve any trades, you can't set up any payments, you can't do anything. You understand that, right? Mandatory, you can't do anything. No approval activity. You can probably at the most see what's going on, but you're not allowed to touch. You're not allowed to enter the building, you're not allowed to enter the premises. So it's kind of expected to be monitored in that fashion. He didn't take any required absence. Could we have monitored that? Set up a simple analytics and say how many people in the year didn't do it. Do you need a license and a tool to do that? Tableau, Python, R, snakes to bite you? No, none. None. You just put all the guys down. Okay, if there are, of course, if it's JP Morgan, you would say, 300,000 people, difficult to do on an Excel sheet, fine, we'll give you the license to do it. They have the money to do it as well, right? So you get the license to do it, right? And then you analyze and say, you know what, we monitor this every quarter, and you know what we find? We find that the commodities desk usually is a culprit. That becomes a huge area of focus, because that's an indication that will tell you that the commodities traders are not in sync with some of the others, or not in sync with the policy. Start with that red flag. What are you looking for? Red flags. Right? What's Amazon looking for? What are you shopping? Right? They're not interested in how much you're buying. They are, of course, bottom line, but they're really interested in what are you buying. So where can they give you the next prompt? Where can they lead you to? What can they lead you to? Right? That's exactly our job. Where does one red flag lead us to? Could we have saved this? Easily. If we had said, Jeremy, you didn't take leave, you now, this very day, go off on leave. You probably have figured out somebody reconciling, daily trades, would have said, come on, hang on, I don't have a counterparty against these trades. What am I doing? There you go. It takes 2 minutes. Because this guy was in control, suppressing confirmations to counterparties, there's no counterparty. And he's managed it well. He's reported back. So many trades, long, great. So the members of the risk committee are seeing, fantastic, we're making money off trades with lower risk, red flag. Are we monitoring that? Where's our daily P&L monitoring? Are we seeing excessive, profit indicators? No. So basically, coming back to the bottom line, right? Coming back to the point that we made earlier, was saying it's the strategy. How do we want to set it up? Which is a critical area versus which is not a critical area? I don't want to spend my time on non-critical areas, which are not enablers, BAU, it's fine. Vendor management, if it doesn't have a sort of analytics, and I don't have the money to invest, I'd be fine. I know you're going to go against me, but I'm just saying that's not where you start. Right? You're going to start with a few more critical processes where you think there could be element of fraud. You get it, right? I don't have to go on, right? Regulatory risk, etc. Right? So this is exactly how you kind of calibrate and say where I'm going to put my money's worth. And if you strategize in that fashion and say, I understand now how I want to implement this, it's going to be amazing. Right? Because then you get your trajectory right, you get your track right, and one fine morning, you're going to discover something that's going to pop up, and you're going to be the ones who's actually picking that up well in advance. At least the indicator. It may still not be true, but this is all what management looks for, early indicators. And your ability to summarize that back as early indicators is going to be extremely helpful. And that's where they'll consider you as valued, because in our profession, it's all about giving opinions. But what about the value? Right? So you've got to say, give opinions and add value. So that add and value is a little faded, right? You've got to make that really strong. And this is the enabler. And then I was telling you, I said in 2 minutes I'll make it worse, but then I'll just probably make it worse right now. The same pattern, sequence of events, different person, thankfully, happened with UBS. Guess how much they lost? $2 billion. Similar pattern. Not monitored, not monitored, not monitored, control, control, control. So you could read all over it that could audit have done this, could audit have done this? Answer was yes, 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 and yes. I didn't think any box was ticked as no. Because all of us back in our banks started to analyze, oh, this happened, let's take our set of controls and mirror whether we've covered somewhere. Right? We'd say, yes, we have. But have we done it in the right depth? Absolutely not. We were lucky. Right? We could, of course, tell the audit committee, yeah, we've covered this, we're safe. But we know there could be that, one person sitting there, controlling all the accesses, waiting for you to kind of relax a bit, and then he goes on. And that happened again. The London Whale. How many of you heard of the London Whale? So this was with JP Morgan. Right, where the CIO had absolute control of the book. He was asked to unwind risk, and he compounded risk for the bank. So positions were getting very risky. So what do? You either hedge or you unwind. He was asked to unwind. He found a way to say, okay, let me now use this opportunity to make money. I'm a smart guy. I work at JP Morgan. Right? So this was another one. Could we have done something about it from an audit perspective? Absolutely. I mean, I don't question anybody here, right? So don't get me wrong, right? I'm only trying to bring out the point to say we have an opportunity set. I mean, I'm not really opining on anybody's control function, right? I mean, they've done their best. I mean, they've tried to do whatever they should, and probably they got it right. And this is just one of those where you override the control. So there's no, there's no sort of mitigation to overriding control. So that's possible. So I've run out of time, as you can see. But what I would want to actually conclude with, I really want to conclude with this, but then some food for thought, right, for all of us is exactly this. It's not about analytics and what we take on board, but it's about how we take analytics on board and use that in the audit. So it's more the strategy question. And if you understand your outcome, and if your outcome is not clear in terms of what are my key success factors and what is the outcome I desire, then your implementation is going to be flawed from an analytics perspective. But I would certainly say, experiment it or use it. There's plenty of technology available, and in this part of the world, plenty of people available to do that. See, we've tamed snakes from Stone Age in this country. Right? We've worshipped. We've tamed snakes. So only now Python has come. So we are well equipped. Right? So we are very well equipped. So it's about you using this opportunity to actually transform your audit function. Right? So as you go back, like I said, we always have to have takeaways. Right? So your key takeaway from this session is going to be about how I strategically think about adopting analytics and not plug in, tick the box. Right? I'll probably end with this note and I would say thank you for the participation. I think it was good interacting with all of you. So I'll see you again in the next session. Right? So if you haven't finished the sleep, there's another opportunity. Okay? So with that, I'll end. Okay? Thank you very much.